All right, so I guess we could start, we get this show going. So the first who's going to speak will be Maury Portnoff, the Montreal Centre's president. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks a lot, Paul. Hopefully everybody can hear me. I'd like to welcome everybody to this event. We're honored and lucky to have our friend David Levy here, Doveed, grace us with some tales and stories of his adventures traveling around the universe. Tonight, we're doing something a little different. We're doing a hosting event with Peter Jedicke representing the London Centre, and he'll come on after me. Just a little bit of background about what RASC is for the non-members of RASC who are joining us, and welcome to you. Hopefully you'll like what you hear, it'll spark your interest, and you'll search out your local centre. Like mentioned, I'm the president of the Montreal Centre, and we've been around for a few years. We were founded in 1918, so we're a little over 100 years, young and still going. In astronomical terms, we're a mere infant. There are about 30 centres throughout Canada, from coast to coast to coast, as they say, with Toronto being founded in 1868, and the youngest centre in our family is the Yukon in the north, 2015, not too long ago. So they have some interesting challenges up there with virtually very long days in the summer and very cold but very dark times in the winter. We have about 150 members in Montreal and of all different abilities and interests in astronomy. So if you're new to astronomy, join up. Our members love to help other members or people in the public. So again, RASC is a very welcoming group to spark your interest in the night sky and even the day sky with the solar observing. So again, thank you for joining us. If you have questions, post them in the chat or in the question set, and we'll get to you. Like I said, Malcolm will be talking about the Kingston Centre, and Peter Jedicke, a good friend of David, will be moderating the evening. So again, thank you and enjoy the evening.
Thank you, Maury. So Malcolm, you're up next.
Thanks very much. On behalf of the Kingston Centre, I'd like to thank the Montreal Centre for inviting us to participate and to co-host this event. As David is the honorary president of both of our centres, and we do have a very fond attachment to David, and we see David every week on our social calls, Zoom calls, and so thank you for including us, and welcome to everybody. This should be a wonderful evening, hearing the stories of observing from David, and letting the conversation flow with Peter and David, and then hopefully extending into something broader maybe later on. But enjoy the evening. Thank you for attending, and welcome to the meeting. And Peter, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Malcolm, and also to the rest of you and hosting Montreal Centre and Kingston Centre. Wonderful idea for an event, and it's a great pleasure and an honor for me to be asked to moderate this evening's event. David and I have known each other many, many years. David, of course, is the discoverer of comet Shoemaker-Levy 9, one of the co-discoverers back in the 1990s. That's probably what he's most famous for. It got him on the cover of magazines and got him on national TV, so folks know his name from that. But he's also an accomplished writer with many books to his credit, often about comets and his observing experiences. And he's also done an awful lot of public lectures over the years. I know recently he's been participating in the Explore Alliance Global Star Party events. David, I see you're listening. You've probably participated in more than 100 of those events, I'm going to guess, since COVID made us all retreat to the online world. But that's been quite a remarkable record for you to have done all that. And your presence online, I know, is as much appreciated as when you appear in person at star parties and clubs all over the place. I could speak for a long time about my friendship with David and all the fun we've had over the years and my respect for David's observing abilities. And David has a remarkable ability to bring things together from different threads, different areas. And so you may also be aware that he has a PhD in English literature. And he's been really studying hard over the years on bringing in connections between literature and astronomy. And that's also something that he's contributed to our hobby. If you'd like to know more about David, I am going to make a mention of this book, which David did the kindness to all of us of writing his own biography. And it's important for someone like David to write their own biography so that we hear it in their own words. And he tells a lot of stories about his background, and he's really quite open. The book is remarkable for its candor in the things the small challenges that David has faced over the years, along with the great fortune that come from his perseverance, his diligence, and how hard he works at being a good astronomer. But I'm going to let David start to talk about eclipses by introducing him in two ways. First of all, I'm going to show you a picture of something you don't see every day. And that is not an eclipse that's observed by David Levy, but an eclipse of the sun by David Levy. This is David Levy standing in front of the regular old sun many years ago when we all had a little more hair. And you'll notice the pronounced prominences and the curly-haired prominences go along with that wonderful corona. David, this is an eclipse of the sun by David Levy. And so now let me read you just a few sentences from David's book. On page 39, the section is called Dreaming About Eclipses. In the early spring of 1963, I dreamt about eclipses. My first dream was about the eclipse of the moon I had seen 2 years earlier in August of 1961. In the dream, that event took place about a week early. 2 nights after my 15th birthday on May 22nd, 1963, I dreamt about the coming solar eclipse. In the dream, I saw the eclipse as a partial eclipse from the Asma home. During the dream, I then realized that July 20th was still several weeks away. The eclipse must have been well on my mind because I had no fewer than 6 dreams about the eclipse in the weeks leading up to it. Folks, that happened back in 1963. So you can all guess that David's older than some of us, and he's had long experiences, and he wants to focus this evening on the fact that he recently observed his 100th eclipse. So David, I'd like to welcome you to our conversation this evening, and perhaps you'd like to give everyone a wonderful greeting.
Well, thank you, Peter. That was a lot of fun. Peter and I, as Peter has already told you, have known each other for a very, very long time. And we've argued an awful lot. But essentially, our friendship has only gotten better over the years. And I don't think it is getting better than it is right this minute. And so thank you, Peter, very much. My first eclipse. This is going to be a heck of a lot more than just about eclipses. My first eclipse was on October the 2nd, 1959. I was getting up that morning, and I knew that there was a major eclipse going on, but the sky was cloudy in Montreal, as it usually is. And but we were having breakfast, and I asked Mom if she wouldn't mind taking my brother Jerry and me to see the eclipse, and she thought that would be a good idea. We got into the car, and we went up Mount Royal, where they have a lovely road, a mountain road that crosses that mountain. And I'm not sure that they still have that anymore, but it's this beautiful road, and there's a parking area just after the highest portion of it. We pulled off. It was cloudy, so we really couldn't see anything. But I noticed, even my little young 11-year-old Doveed brain, that the sky was kind of clearing to the west. And I said, Mom, what do you think about getting into the car and driving to the west now look at it? And she said, you know, I'm a little tired, but that might be worth it. And we got into the car. She drove us to West Mount Lookout, where the sky had cleared up and we were all able to see the final part of the partial eclipse of October the 2nd, 1959. And the reason I remember that eclipse for two reasons. One of the reasons is that it was my first eclipse, but the other reason, perhaps even more important, is that it was my very first observing session number 1. Last night, I was with a group of children in high school children at a school, and we call it the Vail Astronomy Unclub. That was one of Wendy's beautiful ideas, and we had that session. And Peter, when you come to Tucson, you participate in that, and along with some other people as well, which is very, very nice. I enjoy that very, very much. And one of the girls said, tell me, Dr. Levy, what do you enjoy about looking at the night sky the most? And I looked at her and I said, I'm doing it right now. Boy, I was glad to have that question. And it was so much fun. The other interesting thing about the eclipse of October 2nd, 1959, is that it wasn't the only October 2nd. October the 2nd, 2006 was the holiest day in our Jewish calendar. It was called Yom Kippur. And I'd gone the night before that, October the 1st, we had the special introduction to Yom Kippur called Kol Nidre. And if my voice were any better, I would sing a little bit of a song, but I'm going to spare you that tonight. But anyway, and you don't have to smile too much, Peter, on that. But anyway, I was thinking that on Yom Kippur morning, I might get up and do some comet hunting. Well, lo and behold, on Yom Kippur morning, the 2nd of October, 2006, I discovered my most recent comet. It was a periodical comet, a very, very nice one. And, I could see it there in the sky. And I remember going inside and calling my friend Tom Glinos. We were observing together at the time. Tom had a telescope at our home, and he was using it, not that morning, but he was kind of enjoying that. And I told him that I thought I had found one, and we talked about it quite a bit. And then I finally got off the phone and I thought, I don't want to wake Wendy up. I really don't. And I walked into the bedroom so quietly and tiptoed in. And I could see Wendy sound asleep. And I walked in and I took off my shoes and got into bed as quietly as I could. I didn't want to disturb her. And I got into bed, and finally I was comfortable, and I said, I didn't disturb Wendy. And then I looked over to her, and she was looking at me with her smiling face with a humongous smile on it. And she said, you bagged one this morning, didn't you? And I said, yeah. And that took care of the sleeping. And later on that day, when we got back from Yom Kippur services, I said, sweetheart, I know you don't like to get up in the morning when I'm out looking for comets, but would you like to get up tomorrow morning to see the new comet? And she looked at me with another great big smile, and she said, I wouldn't miss that for the world. And she got up the next day, the comet was even a little bit brighter. And it turns out it's a periodic comet, and it comes by every 5 years in these kind of in the style of Encke's comet. Anyway, eclipses. And we're going to talk tonight about a lot more than eclipses, but eclipses kind of act as the frame of my life and the frame of the lecture that I am about to give you. 1963, I was, as Peter so well explained, I was a patient at the Jewish National Home for Asthmatic Children. And I really wanted I was really enjoying that. And also dreaming about seeing a total eclipse of the sun, which would be visible just a few dozen kilometers from Montreal. Anyway, not quite as good as the one we had on April the 8th. And I just wanted to thank God that, you know, we're always complaining about the weather. We cannot do that anymore, because on April the 8th, Montreal was clear as a bell. Remember my brother Jerry, who saw the 1959 eclipse with me, sent me a picture of sunrise that morning from his home, which was absolutely spectacularly clear. And but in 1963, we had to do a little bit of driving. I was allowed to go to Montreal to take about 2 weeks off to go to Montreal to see the eclipse. And the night before, we had dinner with one of my parents' cousins, and he was being very strict about not saying that I could not look at the eclipse without the protective glasses at all. And I said, except during the total phase. And he said, at all. And I said, except during the total phase. And he said, we just went back and forth on this for about half an hour. And he said, actually, the totality is the most dangerous of all. And I knew he didn't know what the heck he was talking about. And so I kept on putting in. Finally, I just let him finish talking. The next day, we drove all the way to an area south of Trois-Rivières. And I was very good. I had my glasses on, looking at the partial phases. The clouds were there, coming in and out. And but we got a fairly good view of it. And I really was getting excited that we might actually get to see the total phase of this. And I noticed right now that Linda Meyer is in the audience from the Ottawa Centre. And so a special hello to Linda and to all of the people from Ottawa who may be with us tonight. Anyway, back to the 63 eclipse. Remember, we got a little, my father, who I really miss so much, Dad, as the totality came, the sky appeared to get more and more cloudy. And there were a few breaks, but not too many. And Dad prayed. He said, God, please let my son have a break in the clouds. And he started laughing. Yeah, a break in the clouds so he can see the eclipse. And a break came, the diamond ring, and the total eclipse. And what did Doveed do at the total eclipse? I took my glasses off and I looked at the total eclipse. My dad just screamed. He said, get your glasses on. And I said, I said to myself, I'm not gonna have an argument with Dad in the middle of a total eclipse. So I put the glasses on right away. And he said, thank you. And we're looking at the eclipse. And I turned around facing away from Dad, took the glasses off and enjoyed the rest of the eclipse. It wasn't really that bad because the totality was only a minute, but it was wonderful. A few months later, there was another eclipse, this one of the moon, December the 30th, 1963. And I can report that to you because of all the eclipses that I have seen, that was by far the darkest that I've ever seen. It was very clear in Montreal, extremely cold, and when totality began, it was about a 45-minute totality of this eclipse. The moon simply disappeared. It wasn't the blood red moon that we usually see. It wasn't even a dark red moon. There was no moon at all. It was like there was nothing to see. Konstantin Babakosmas, who was observing out in the country, did see the moon, and he said that it was about as bright as a 5th magnitude star. And that was really a fabulous dark eclipse. And that was all. There was another eclipse in '64, which was still pretty dark, but brighter than the '63 eclipse, and another one at the end of '64 that was brighter still. I got to see all of those eclipses, just wonderful. And then in 1965, I was walking to high school. And the high school that I went to, as many of you know, is Westmount High School. And if you look on I really am not allowed to get into politics here, but I do have to share with you that if you look in the Wikipedia entry for Westmount High, and they say notable graduates, one of the notable graduates is indeed Kamala Harris, whose mom was in Montreal at the time doing some research at the Jewish General Hospital. And the way I understand it, one of the people that she was doing research with was Kamala's mom. And so I'd like to think, and she's not here anymore, I miss her very much, but that she knew Kamala's mom. And one of the advantages, as I've been thinking the last few days, is that Kamala might have a little more time than she would have if things had gone the other way. And it would be nice. It would be nice if I could perhaps maybe meet her at some point. Not to talk about politics, but I want to talk about Westmount High School. See if we shared any teachers together. I just had a wonderful time at that place. And then I went to McGill, and I didn't do very well at McGill. I flunked out at McGill. I got 1 D- and 4 Fs. I was able to get back in with the help of my dad, who was not very happy about my performance that year. So I repeated the year and flunked a second time. I then went to McGill for education and flunked a third time. So McGill was so ashamed and angry at me that they ended up giving me an honorary doctorate a few decades later. And so I guess, excuse me a minute. Excuse me just a minute while I try to stay alive here. Okay. I was also very active at the time at the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada and at the Montreal Centre. And I was in charge of the Comet and Nova search section. And Miss Williamson, who was in charge at the time, really did not like the job I was doing. She thought that I was really a blabbermouth. I didn't listen to other people. I had a big mouth, and I didn't think before I talked. And she was completely right. And one day, at the end of April of 1967, I knew I was being expelled from McGill. I was thrown out of the observatory that night because of an argument that I had with Isabel Williamson. And about 2 weeks later, now early May, I came back, and this time the entire board of the observatory at the time physically threw me out of the building. And that was really not a very pleasant story, although it turned out it was extremely pleasant, although I didn't know it at the time. But then the very next day, a board of directors meeting was called to have me expelled from the National Royal Astronomical Society of Canada. And they had the board meeting, and Constantine, I understand from Robert Ballantyne that he and Constantine had observed that eclipse together, but I also know they were involved in that particular event together that I'm now relating to you. Anyway, Constantine and I talked about it till late into the night, and he said, "You're going to get a very nasty letter from our president, but there's nobody who wants to have you expelled from the society. Absolutely nobody." And and I felt a little bit relieved of that. The very next day, I got a message that a telescope had arrived for me, one that I had ordered that my grandfather had given to me. And that was the day that my 15 centimeter reflector, F4 Minerva, arrived. I still have that telescope. And those of you in Montreal might have been at a Zoom session recently where I was trying to get rid of most of my telescopes. This was something I decided at our Adirondack astronomy retreat last summer, that I really needed to de-telescopify myself. And and I did that. The getting rid of the telescopes turned out to be a lot more successful than I thought. And as of next week, all but 3 are going to be gone. The 3 that I'm keeping, one of them is this one right here. This is Cupid. And I need to share that story with you. Wendy and I were visiting London, England, and we had a free day, and we were sort of looking around the shops. And there was a telescope store there in London. And I was looking in the window, and I saw a Questar. And I kind of just glared at this Questar. And Wendy looked at me, and she smiled, and she said, "Doveed, I need for you to be honest with me." And I said, "Aren't I honest? Always honest with you?" And she said, "Not usually, but now I need for you to be honest." And I said, "Okay." And she said, "Take a look at that Questar." And she looked at the price tag, which she was very price conscious, which was approximately $7,000. And she said, "We have a telescope this size. It is a Meade ETX. And the price tag on that is about $700. I want you to tell me that this Questar is 10 times better than our ETX." And I looked at her and I said, "Sweetie, that this Questar is better than the ETX, but 10 times better, not a chance, no way, not even close." And so she said, "So you pay for the price, you get the price." And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Thank you, I appreciate that." And about 2 months later, we were back in Arizona, and Wendy proclaimed that we were going to have dinner that night with our friend Dean Koenig from Star Arizona, which is a very well-known store in Tucson. And we got there, and on the table was this lovely box with a bow on top of it, and inside was this telescope. This is one of the telescopes I'm proud to say I am not giving up. She said, Wendy said, "I'm going to give it to you on the condition that you name it Cupid in honor of our love and our marriage." And that was easy for me. So the telescope is still named Cupid, and I still use it to do my daily sunspot observations. Another telescope that you probably would think that I have is Miranda, which is the telescope that I have used to discover virtually all but one of my comets that I found visually. That one I do not have anymore. That one I donated to our beloved Royal Astronomical Society of Canada, where it is right now at the museum, the Donner Telescope Museum in Toronto, with a lot of balloons, each one representing one of the comets that it discovered. And it's there, and anyone visiting the museum can see it. Another telescope that you probably think I have is Pegasus, which is the 8-inch telescope that I've had since 1964. That one also has been donated to someone else. But the telescope that I do have is one that I got from Scotty Roberts a few years ago. It is a 12-inch f5 Dobson, which I named Eureka, after Archimedes' behavior when he discovered the principle of displacement while he was taking a bath. And the story is he jumped out of the bathtub and ran outside yelling, Eureka, Eureka. The story does not say that after he jumped out of the bathtub, he put on his tie and his jacket. It misses that whole part out. Just said he jumped out of the bathtub, ran down the street. And I imagine that there are people looking out the windows telling their children, oh, don't worry about that. That's just Archimedes. He does what he wants to do. Anyway, so this telescope is named Eureka. And it is very pleasant. And there's one other telescope that I have. So it's Eureka. It is Eureka, Minerva, which I will always keep, and Cupid. I'm now down to 3 telescopes. Peter, I think when we first became friends, I had a lot more than 3 telescopes. But I'm down to 3 right now. And anyone who comes to visit me will get to look through one of those 3 telescopes. Anyway, I finally got accepted to a university in the Maritimes, Acadia, and I did very badly my first year. So I almost flunked my first year at Acadia. And my dad and my mom were not very happy about that at all. I did not a little bit better my second year. And then at the end of my second year, I realized that I was doing a lot better in English literature than I was in any of the science courses. And I decided that I was going to change my direction in life. I was not going to become an astronomer. That was hopeless. But instead, I was going to get a degree in English literature. That was a good decision. In my third year at Acadia, I made the dean's list. I got pretty much not straight A's, but there were a number of A's, a number of B pluses, and nothing else. And I remember Dad came home that day, and he looked at the report card that I had, and he just started to cry. And it was just a wonderful feeling. And that was one of the things where I began to get really, really close to my dad. And I remember a few weeks after that, when he got a letter from the president of Acadia saying that I had made the dean's list, I just was sitting in my room that morning, and I could hear Dad running down the hallway and barging into my room and giving me a hug. Didn't say a word, just gave me a long hug. And these are just some of the lovely arrangements. After I graduated, I went through a long period of depression, which, as some of you know, is something that I've had to tolerate and put up with during most of my life. And after I got over that for a while, I applied and got accepted to Queen's. And while I was getting ready to go to Queen's, I was thinking about the things that I would like to do while I was there. And what would I like to do? Of course, my interest in Shakespeare, which I also inherited from my dad, was very strong. But I knew that everything had been done about Shakespeare, and there was nothing new to do. So I decided I was going to go out and observe a meteor shower with my friends from the Montreal Centre. The meteor shower was the Lyrics. And we're out there. It was a clear night. So Montreal's always cloudy, but how come it's clear on all of the major events where we really need it to be clear? It is. And I was thinking of all the people that saw Lyrid meteors over the past years, decades, centuries. Not just amateur astronomers, but writers, poets. Did Shakespeare himself observe the Lyrid meteors? I think he probably did. And while I was thinking about that, I got the idea what I wanted to do at Queen's. And that is to choose a Victorian poet and describe his or her love of the night sky and how he or she expressed it in poetry. The very next day, I met Dr. Mackenzie, went to Queen's and met with him, told him what I wanted to do, and immediately he introduced me to Gerard Manley Hopkins. I think all of you have taken Hopkins in high school or in college, and you probably, only one of you didn't. Okay, but all of you know that he is probably the most difficult poet to read. His rhyme scheme is very difficult to follow, and it's just impossible. And the best thing about Hopkins is that you close the book and you go on to another poet, except for a poem that he wrote while he was an undergraduate at Cambridge. And of all things, it was about a comet. And I made it the aim of my master's thesis to figure out what comet. It had to be the comet of 1861. That's a great big comet. And but my advisor said, oh no, it couldn't have been that, because the second line of the poem, bridging the slender difference of two stars, was absolutely, there were no two stars. Actually, there were. It was on one side of the very bright comet was Capella, and then the tail was stretching all the way back towards Arcturus. And he said, no, he was pretty specific about that. I didn't think so. I then thought about comet of 1862. Of course, that was the one that is the parent of the Perseid meteor shower. And I knew that couldn't have been it. And then I thought, what about Temple's comet of 1864? And I even found an article written at the time that said that on Monday next, it would be between the star Iota in Auriga and Beta in Taurus. And I thought, bridging the slender difference of two stars. And it had to be it. So I ran over to where Dr. Mackenzie's office was, and I told him, and he said, no. And I said, what do you mean no? Because now I was getting a little annoyed at him, because I thought he was just messing with me at this point. He said, well, David, I know that a Iota star is a lot fainter than a beta star. And he couldn't have meant a beta star, which was very bright and big and lovely, and an Iota star, which was barely visible without binoculars or a telescope. And I smiled at him and I said, Dr. Mackenzie, most of the time I have to agree with you. And he smiled. And I said, but not now. And he said, why? And I said, because I looked at those two stars just last night. And Auriga has a lot of bright stars in it because of that pentagonal shape it has. And there are a lot of bright stars in it. And Taurus has been sort of the normal number of bright stars. So Iota Aurigae, it's fainter than Beta Tauri, but it is less than a magnitude fainter than Beta Tauri. And Dr. Mackenzie sort of looked at me. He said, "Are you certain of this?" And I said, "I am very certain of this." And he said, "David, you got it. You figured it out. And this is going to be the heart of your master's thesis." And boy, I had a lot of fun with that poem. I am like a slip of comet, scarce worth discovery, in some corner seen bridging the slender difference of two stars. But when she sights the sun, she grows and sizes and spins her skirts out, while her central star shakes its cocooning mists. And so she comes to fields of light, millions of traveling rays curse her. She hangs upon the flame-cased sun and sucks the light as full as Gideon's fleece. But then her tether calls her. She falls off, and as she dwindles, sheds her smock of gold amidst the sistering planets, and then goes out into the cavernous dark. So I go out, my little suite is done. I have drawn heat from this contagious sun, to not ungentle death now forth I run. I just love that poem, and thank you for letting me recite it for you. I just love it. And I did a lot of things with it. I did my master's thesis. I still have it. It's right up here on one of my bookshelves. And Dr. Mackenzie was the first to suggest that I go on for a doctorate. But I was getting a little tired of that, and I really didn't want to at that point. My mom was the second person to suggest that I go on for a doctorate. And she said, "You should finish what you started. You know, I love you very much, but you tend to give up too easily. I mean, I know that you were looking for comets at one point, and you gave that up. And I know that you were doing this and you're that. Don't give up everything you start to do." I was driving back from Kitt Peak one night in Arizona with Brian Marsden, may he rest in peace now. And Brian himself said, "I think you should get a doctorate. I don't care what you get it in, but you should do it." And I told him about Mom's suggestion. And he said, "Well, she's right. Finish what you started. I'd like to see you do that." And it turned out that at that time, a little before my discussion with Brian, I'm still at Queen's. And I decided, no, I'm not going to go on for a doctorate. Final decision, bang. Instead, I got out a piece of paper and a pen, and I wrote a letter to Isabel Williamson, just asking her how she was doing. And I knew what she was going to do. She was going to read it and either tear it up and stomp on it or just laugh and throw it away. But I knew she was going to throw it away. What I didn't expect was that she answered the letter like about a week later, filled with news as to what she was doing. She had left the center, but she was still excited about the night sky. And at the end of her letter, she said, "David, could you do me a favor? If you are ever in Montreal again, I should like to visit with you." And it turned out I made a trip to Montreal just a few weeks later. I visited her and we had this wonderful meeting. It was not in her nature to apologize for anything, but that visit began a friendship that was far better than the one we had when I was younger. And as I left her house that day, she said, "I need for you to do me another favor." And I said, "Sure." She said, "I want you to promise me that whenever you come to Montreal to visit your family, you will also visit me." And I kept that promise right up until the time that she passed away in the year 2000. And we did become members from letters she wrote me, like around SL9, to make her Levy 9, and she said, "Dear David, have you come back to Earth yet?" Just lovely friendship that we had. And my mom, of course, being a very good mother, was trying to get me going with a little more of a social life than I had. You know, I had my first marriage that I called my practice marriage, and it was, it did not last very long. And but mom was kind of trying, and she had regained her friendship with a woman that she was friendly with at a summer camp when they were both young. And this woman had a daughter named Wendy. And she and my mom decided they were going to try to get Wendy and me together. And so mom said, I'd like you to go out with this girl, Wendy. And I said, no, I'm not interested. But finally, after she asked a few more times, I said, okay, I'll do it. And then the next visit, have you spoken with Wendy? No, not yet. And we kept on going for 7 years. Finally, she asked again, and I said, no, not yet. She got very angry and she said, David, forget I asked you that. Forget that I even mentioned it. You go and live your life. It's a very successful life, and forget I even mentioned Wendy. I took that as a challenge. As soon as I got home, I wrote to Wendy, and I told her what I was doing and my family and what my interests are. And she answered me pretty quickly. She said that she had an adopted, not a daughter, but a ward who was living with her that she considered like a daughter. And she was, and at the end of my letter, I asked if she would like to get together, and she said she would. And in July of 1992, I rang the doorbell of her home in Las Cruces, New Mexico. I didn't fall in love with her at first sight, but I noticed that this was one of the most beautiful women I had ever seen. And we had a lovely lunch, after which I got to meet her beautiful sisters. And we sort of started getting together. As a gift for our first date, I gave her a copy of my biography of Claude Domblot. And that was the only time I spelled her name wrong. And she corrected that pretty quickly. And we sort of kept on going just as a friendship for a while, until she was visiting my home one day. She decided it's time, you know, you visited me, it's time I visit you. And we had a very nice weekend until the Sunday. She was about to get ready to leave to return to Las Cruces. And suddenly I noticed she was looking out the window of my home, crying. I said, what's wrong? What's wrong? And she looked at me and she rubbed her eyes and she said, David, I know that we are not going to get together, much as I would love to. But I can promise you that if you don't let somebody into your life, all you're going to have when you grow up and you grow old is your ice comets to snuggle up to. And you're going to be very, very lonely. And that did it. I was in love with Wendy. We snuggled and we were on the couch for maybe an hour, and that was it. In 1997, we were married at the Flandreau Planetarium in Tucson. Peter, you were there at the wedding, and we had a wonderful, wonderful marriage. Our whole relationship was about 30 years long. Excuse me. I'm going to take a 2-second break and take some coffee here. And I've already told you the story about this telescope, but Wendy and I just really enjoyed it. Wendy was not into astronomy as much as I was, but she built that in as we got older. She got more and more enthralled with it. First, she was enthralled with my devotion to it, my single-minded devotion to the night sky. And then she started to develop her own devotion, but she never had to with eclipses. We get back to eclipses. Before we were even together, in her diary, whenever there was an eclipse of the moon or an eclipse of the sun, she was out there watching it. And she loved eclipses. So did I. And we saw every eclipse we could. We went on trips. We went on all kinds of excursions and areas, including outside our own home, looking at eclipses. And of course, by the total eclipse of 2017, Wendy was saying she was already developing her breast cancer. And she looked at me and she said, Doveed, I want so badly to be alive for the 2024 total eclipse. I really want to stay alive for that one. So you can imagine how I felt last April the 8th, observing in Texas with this very cloudy sky and no Wendy. I was there, and I told the group that it was going to be a difficult day for me and just sort of ignore it. And we got a few views, like the 63 eclipse, of the incoming partial. But as the total eclipse, as the shadow of the moon, the central shadow approached, it was getting pretty obvious to me that I wasn't going to see it. None of us were. The clouds are just getting thicker and thicker. And I was hoping it wasn't going to rain, but they were getting really pretty thick. One of the women in our group asked, she said, we're not going to see the eclipse. We're not going to see the total eclipse. But could you at least read a poem? Which I agreed to do. And, you know, I'm standing out there watching the sky getting just plummeting into darkness and getting darker and darker. And I could feel the temperature drop. So if I'm looking at a thermometer and watching the needle drop. And then, you know, I was actually shivering. And I did my quotation. It was a very short one, and it is the quotation that I will very shortly end this presentation with. And I did the quotation, and it was over, and we silently looked up at this cloudy sky. And I like to think at that time that Wendy in heaven went up to God, and she said, why aren't you letting Doveed see the eclipse? And God smiled at her and said, well, you know, Doveed hasn't been a very good boy lately. He, for example, he's not doing very well with my third commandment. He's trying, but he doesn't have it yet. And so I'm punishing him and I'm not letting him see the eclipse. And Wendy looked out, and she sort of put her hands on her hips and she said, God, let Doveed see the damned eclipse. And God looked at Wendy and said, okay, you're the boss. And I'm standing out there, and all of a sudden, I'm seeing this magnificent eclipse with the corona, with the prominence at the bottom, and it was wonderful. And I saw it for about 2 minutes, and because this was a very long totality, I could actually see it, and I just loved it. And it then got cloudy again, but after third contact, I was able to see Bailey's beads, which was just as fun. It was an absolutely wonderful thing. Immediately afterwards, I realized that Wendy wasn't there. And I got very, very quiet. And I quietly left the group. And I went all the way to a place by myself, sat down, and cried my eyes out. And I was beyond talking to anybody for about an hour or so. And it just happened, and it happens from time to time. But I have to tell you that I am doing better. I am being recalled to life, like in Great Expectations. And I'm enjoying life again, but I miss Wendy so much. I just miss the fun we had and the joy of our relationship together. And so, as we go on, I think I've talked long enough. I could go on some more, but I am going to bring this to an end. And of course, I'm going to end it with a quotation. And this was Wendy's favorite quotation. It was Ralph Hudson's poem called The Song of Honor. And I'm going to end this with the ending of The Song of Honor. Wendy loved it so much that whenever I'd end it with a lecture I'd be giving in person, I would look down and see her in the front row mouthing the words as a student. And then after a while, I would even invite her to come up to the podium and do it with me, which she enjoyed very much. But I can't do that now, but I can end this lecture with my poem, with the poem that Wendy's loved so, so much. I stood and stared. The sky was lit. The sky was stars. All over it I stood. I knew not why. Without a wish, without a will, I stood upon that silent hill and stared into the sky until my eyes were blind with stars, and still I stared into the sky. Thank you all very much.
Well, thank you, of course, David. Your inspiring way of telling stories is quite wonderful. It's you've always had a knack for bringing in the right part of a story at the right time. And you and I have shared many moments when we've privately had a chance to tell those kind of stories. So I can say to the audience this evening that I know that this is something that's very genuine from you. I know that for a fact. And I already mentioned your autobiography. Your ability to tell a story comes out really well in that book. And let me again say, I recognize many of the names on today's participant list. So I know that many of the folks who are on this event this evening know you and probably have already read your biography. But for those of you who don't know David as well as the rest of us do, let me recommend that you read David's biography, A Night Watchman's Journey, and learn more about what makes David such a remarkable character in our world of astronomy. We're lucky to have him as a Canadian. You are lucky to have him in the Montreal Centre and the Kingston Centre as your honorary president. I remember when he was asked to serve, I think it was Kingston Centre was second after you were already honorary president for Montreal, if I remember the order correctly. And David and I had a chance to talk about what the role of an honorary president is. And in a lot of cases, RASC centers have honorary presidents who are perhaps a well-known local professional astronomer with a remarkable research record or something along those lines, and not necessarily a connection to the center. And David told me that he thought that it was a different view of the role of an honorary president, but an important one nonetheless, that an honorary president be someone that the members of the center could all feel connected to. And that would be a way of expressing David's love for these two organizations, Montreal Centre and Kingston Centre. And I think that the members of those two clubs probably agree with me in saying that he's been a really great choice for honorary president. So thank you again, David, for your reminiscences. I see a few mentions in the chat feature. I haven't had a chance to read them yet while I've been
Well,
thinking about this.
just let me interrupt you for just a
And
second.
David's going to interrupt me now.
Yeah, I don't want to forget to point out that that beautiful model of the Saturn V, Peter built that himself. That is wonderful. Nice going, Peter.
Well, of course, I couldn't have done it without the help of the Lego folks over in Denmark or Sweden. But and I did have some help the night we built it. But yeah, it was a fun project as well. Anyway, I like I say, I noticed a few things in the chat. Paul, are you able to pick up the questions from the chat, or should I try to do that?
Oh, you can do that. I mean,
Okay. All right. Let me open that window and let me see. I see Robert Ballantyne. Robert, I don't know if you and I have ever met face to face, but I've seen your name a million times. I really appreciate a couple of your memories that you've typed into the chat over the last half hour or so. As far as I know, the recording of this event will be available. I don't know if you're allowed to download it or not, but I think it goes up on YouTube.
that is the
Paul
plan.
or Malcolm might be able to clarify that.
It will be on YouTube sometime during the week.
That's very great. And we have a bunch of the other comments are mainly in the line of thanks, and two names in particular that are worth pointing out to you, David, because they're also very long-time friends, are Alistair Ling from Edmonton Centre.
Notice Alistair's here.
Alistair's here, and of course Linda Meyer. And
Yeah.
and thanks from the other folks as well. Carl and Joe, Rebecca, who we heard speaking earlier but when the meeting began, and Anthony. Interesting, Anthony, you say you're moved to tears, and I share that. I've had many opportunities to give a good cry with Doveed over the years, different things that he's shared with me personally and things we've done together, observing experiences. But I see no questions specifically about eclipses. I guess everybody here knows everything they need to know about eclipses. David, however, I will prevail upon you. Your voice was still fairly strong, and I see you're smiling, and I know that's a good sign. So I'm going to ask you to tell the story of your Antarctic eclipse experience. That's a pretty rare kind of thing. Not too many astronomers have been to the Antarctic to see a solar eclipse, and you had quite an adventure there. I'd like you to tell that story.
The eclipse in Antarctica was kind of just like any other eclipse. You know, it was total. It got very dark. And that was it. That's the end of the story about Antarctica. Except that the shadow bands before and after that eclipse were visible for kilometers all over the continent, all over the ice. How long did we see the shadow bands? 12 minutes of shadow bands. That is the highlight of that particular eclipse.
Now you saw the shadow bands on the ice.
On the ice.
Yeah. Was the ice fairly smooth?
The ice was pretty smooth, yeah. There were distant mountains around, but we were on a fairly flat area. And the ice was it was easy to walk on. It was smooth, but it was not something you'd trip on because the ice had been there for a long time. But the shadow bands were just magnificent. That eclipse.
When I give presentations about eclipses, and I gave a whole bunch of them earlier this year, often folks express surprise that folks like you and me and everyone else on this event to this evening are willing to go to such great lengths to spend just a couple of minutes in the shadow of the sun, of the moon. And every time folks tell me that they think I'm crazy for driving 1,000 kilometers to see an eclipse, I think of you and going all the way to the Antarctic just to see a total solar eclipse. And now we've got a question from Roger. Which eclipse in 1965 did you see? Can you do that from memory, or do you have to reach to your observing logs to answer that question?
No, that eclipse was a lunar eclipse. And I think it was in June of 1965. And the reason I remembered that one was that I had a big argument with my dad that night because it looked like it was going to rain. And Dad made the innocent comment. He says, "I think it's going to rain." I just blew up at him, lost my temper, and I stormed out of the room, ran upstairs, slammed the door, and he wasn't happy. I wasn't happy. I went out and saw the end of that eclipse because it did clear at the end, and I was able to see the outgoing partial of that eclipse. And the next day I went to apologize to my father, and he, of course, had nothing to do with it. He was very angry. And the day after that, and the day after that. And then I was going to go to a summer camp. And the morning I was going to go to the summer camp, I thought, if he doesn't accept my apology now, it's going to be 6 weeks before I ask him again. And he kind of looked at me, shook his head, and so I walked out. And then about 2 minutes later, he came in. He said, "Would you come into the dining room?" Which I did. And he said, "I'm sorry." I said, "I'm the one who's sorry." He said, "No, I was messing with you, and I shouldn't have done that. You were real nervous about missing that eclipse, which you didn't, and I'm really so sorry about that." And we got to be friends again. And that's kind of a nice memory I have with him. You knew my dad, not as much as you knew Mom, but you knew my dad very well at the end of his life.
Yeah, one of my favorite memories is going for a walk in a park near your parents' home in Montreal a year or two before your dad passed, and you were walking with your dad in front of Diane and me, and we were watching the two of you and seeing how close you were and how much you were enjoying each other's conversation. It's a nice vivid memory, image in my mind of the two of you.
Yeah, it was very, very special. And there's one story during the time that I was almost expelled from the RASC, and he started yelling at me. He says, "You have a big mouth, and you have a lot of growing up to do. And I'm really ashamed of your behavior with this, blah, blah, blah." 2 weeks after that, it was my birthday. And Dad says, "Another walk." So we started walking. And I said, "Okay, give me my birthday present, yell at me again." He looks at me and he says, "I'm not going to yell this time. I'm going to take back everything I said the last time." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Because I was wrong. You were provoked." And I said, "No, you were right. I do have a big mouth. I don't think before I talk, and I have a lot of growing up to do." Dad looked at me, hugged me. He said, "You just did something." I've never forgotten it.
Yeah, that's really quite touching. And again, it's easy for me to say this now, and when I look down the list of the names of the folks participating, how many of them are mutual friends, and they all know that you have this knack for telling touching stories, and you have a way of reaching out to folks and making folks feel that they are, personally connected. I like that so much. I remember, I'll tell everybody this story. David and I went to Denver once. We drove together across the prairies and stopped in Denver. David was giving a presentation, and it was a really large event, hundreds of folks in the audience, and I sat in about the 8th row or something like this, and I was near the aisle, and there was a person sitting next to me, and of course I had just arrived, had never been to Denver before. The person sitting next to me leaned over to me and said, "David's a good friend of mine." And he was saying that really just because David had managed to make him feel close through all the presentations and appearances. Of course, David has that personal tie as a teenager to Denver as well. So it's really quite special. David,
I'd like to add to that I am back involved with the Denver Astronomical Society. And recently I was appointed their poet laureate. So I try to go to each of their meetings and recite a poem. And sometimes I forget, but I try to make it as often as I can.
Yeah.
That's what happens when you get to be 76.
Yeah, we're not spring chickens anymore. I do see at least one name from the next generation, and that's Matt Meyer is on today's call. I hope we do have more younger folks around. It's something that the clubs in the RASC are dealing with. As far as I know, every club has made some kind of an effort, and it's a struggle to different degrees to get the younger generation involved. And you were mentioning in your introduction, David, you talked about attending the event at the school just this week, and that's another way to really help inspire another generation of astronomers.
Yeah.
So Maury, we're getting on in time here. Maury and Malcolm and Paul, how much more time would you like us to take? I'm pretty sure David and I can talk till midnight.
I just have a few little stories I wouldn't mind mentioning. Many years ago, when we were all a little younger, I remember my first talk attending with David. I think it was at John Abbott College, probably P204, where we have most of our lectures. And he gave us the most entertaining talk I've ever heard of David. Maybe because he was a little younger and we were younger, but it was a story of when David got, as he mentioned, got kicked out of or was attempted to get kicked out of RASC and Montreal, and his story with Isabel Williamson, and how that relationship went from foe to being very close friends in the end. And that always stayed with me. That whole process of sort of maturing, relationship maturing from a youngster who I guess, thought he knew a little bit more than he did know at the time, but it matured and to be a friendship for life. And that really stuck with me. Also, you talk about bringing young people into the center. We have a wonderful relationship with John Abbott College, where the students are part of our center. We bring them in and they organize events for us, and it's actually wonderful. So that it's not just a bunch of old guys and hanging out, drinking coffee, but we have the young people there, and we even get them now onto the board. So the only trouble with that is having students that they move on in life. They move to other universities and jobs and whatever, but they're with us for a while, and they keep us young.
I think they do keep us young, and it's reminding me of another story. After to finish a story that I forgot to during my lecture, but after Brian Marsden wanted me to go on for my doctorate, I'd say approximately every 5 years after that, I would get the idea, finish what you started, get your doctorate. And I would stomp on that idea till it went away, and it wouldn't come back for another 5 years. And then it was 1997. It was the year we had already gotten married. And this thought entered my mind again. And I went over to where Wendy was. And I said, I just got this thought. And I told her the story about the 5 years. And I said, but don't worry about it, because I'm going to stomp on this floor until the idea goes away. And we don't have to worry about it for another 5 years. And I started to leave. And Wendy said, Doveed, before you go stomping, I think your mom's right. I think all these people are right. And I think you're not as busy as you were a few years ago. And I think you should today decide to get your doctorate. And I did. And I found someone at the Hebrew University. And by this time, I wanted to do Shakespeare. And but there's nothing new to be done with Shakespeare. Everything's been done. The box is closed. Except that no one really, and they've even done Shakespeare and science, but no one did Shakespeare and the night sky. And I counted in all of the writings of him that he did, over 200 references to the night sky throughout his canon. And I just had so much fun doing that. I got my doctorate in the English department at the Hebrew University in 2010. And that's just a nice, happy story, because what I do with that doctorate is that I'm reading the poems, as I did tonight, that I've collected. Tonight I chose two that I could recite from memory. And but there are a lot that I still have to read. And I'm now working on a book. And I'm hoping, I can share this thought with you, that I'm hoping that the publisher will be the McGill Queen's University Press, because I got flunked out of McGill 3 times. So there's a definite connection to McGill. And Queen's, I did my master's there, and so there's a connection with Queen's. So I kind of like to do it with them. And so let's hope that happens. But whether it's with them or with someone else, I'm working on that right now.
Well, that's pretty wonderful as well, David. And I don't know if we want to wrap things up, but let me just, in the spirit of, as we develop our friendships and as we go through life, I'm going to show 2 pictures. And the first one is November 1979. And this is David Levy in his backyard observatory. The sign, which is not quite legible in the photo, says Jarnac Observatory. Jarnac is a name from a lake in the Quebec woodlands north of Ottawa. And you can see that David's got a smaller telescope and a smaller building. You might even notice that the building has a flip-off roof, not a roll-off roof. That was where David was observing in 1970. It wasn't his only observing outlet, but it was one of them. And then a more recent photo of David in his observatory just a few years ago. We can see that things have developed quite a bit, haven't they?
Yeah. I love that picture because Wendy took that picture.
Yeah, I knew that.
Is the roof still flip off?
Yes, it does. The building is still there. There's a lot more room in the building now than there was.
Peter,
I'm here.
may I join? Okay, good. I'm sorry, I've been trying to work with chat, and my message went to Paul. And David, I'm looking up your book to see where I can get it. And by the way, just to clear something up, I may be in Saskatoon, but I'm an unattached member of the RASC. And David and I have known each other since I was quite young. I figure I'm about 6 years younger. And I remember going up to Laurentian. I can't remember if you had your observatory up at Jarnac at that point.
I didn't have the observatory, but I did have telescopes up there, including Minerva, which I still have.
Right. Anyway, it was wonderful. I remember taking the train a couple of times to Montreal Centre, and that's how I met Isabel Williamson way back when, in the late 60s. But curious about your book. Can we order it directly from you?
You can. I would recommend that you order it. You can get them both, I think, from Amazon or from Starizona here in Tucson.
Well,
if you get it from Starizona, I will go to Starizona and autograph it for you.
Ooh, okay.
well, is it not available from the RASC's?
Yeah,
I wasn't
it's
sure.
available from the RASC as well.
I thought it was available from the East.
Okay, and someone else just texted to say it was available from the RASC. Thank you very much.
Oh yeah, it's available from them as well. So, and they are the publishers of that book, and so that's good, Chris.
Yeah, I'm looking at the website now, and I don't see David's book on the list, but I was pretty sure it is available. Pretty sure I saw a stack of copies of this book when I was at the Society's office in Toronto not too long ago. So That's the book you want to get to read, to learn more about David's sense of humor, how amazing his memory is, and his love of poetry, his passion for sharing the night sky, all that cool stuff. Oh, there it is. Santiago's put the link. Thank you very much.
If you want to order it from Star Arizona and get an autograph, their phone number is 520-292-5010. And tell them that you want it autographed. And to call me and tell me to come in and autograph. I'm going to be in there at the end of the month, and I can throw that autograph on that day.
Some people were asking about if the presentation will be available on YouTube, and it will be in about a week or so. It'll be on the YouTube channel of the Montreal Centre and also of the Kingston Centre.
Looking forward to that, except it'll be in Latin.
Klingon.
And Klingon.
Well, Malcolm and Maury, should we hand it back to you for final thoughts, or?
Okay, well, I would just like to thank David for being here tonight, being our honorary president and more importantly, our friend, and I count him as a friend. It's a great honor to have him as a friend, and we're looking forward to your next visit to Montreal and a nice smoked meat dinner, which is always a highlight.
Me too.
And thank you to Peter and Malcolm for helping put this together, Paul for keeping us all online and connected, and everybody else who took the time out to join us tonight. Thank you, everybody.
I think I'd like to also add my thanks on behalf of the Kingston Centre, and thank you, David, for continuing to be such an inspiration to all of us. I'd like to mention Karim Jaffer. He was helpful in organizing tonight's event. And Maury, Peter, and Paul, thank you very much as well. And yes, there will be a copy of the presentation tonight on YouTube later. Thanks very much.
Okay. So I want to thank everybody for participating. I believe we're supposed to switch this into kind of like a free-for-all at this point, if we want. So I could just simply turn off the spotlights and
So everybody can talk now. That's nice.
yeah.
Turn
That's
off the recording.
Just one more. Yeah, there we go.
Thank you very much. I have to leave, but thank you. This was wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
What's your next eclipse?
The next eclipse will be in March. Linda, and thank you for asking. I will be observing it from the summit of Palomar Observatory.
Oh, wow.
Now, Palomar is the place that I did. It's not where I had the highlight of my personal life. The highlight of that was Wendy. But the highlight of my professional life, because Palomar is where I was involved in the discovery of Comet Shoemaker 9. And there's going to be a total eclipse of the moon in March, and I would like to be at Palomar to see it from there with my friend Jean Mueller. And if anyone else is interested in making the trip with us, you better let me know. It's not a private trip at the moment, but it's something that I'm looking forward to.
Thank you. Oh, just to let you guys know, that road through the mountain is still there, but it's heavily restricted. You can't drive through it anymore. You can take public transit though.
What road are you talking about?
To the Mount Royal lookout that you were talking about earlier.
Well, thank you. So That is restricted now.
Yeah, it was closed off a few years ago after a biker was killed. So it's just public transit and by foot.
Well, like I said, this is a free-for-all, so anybody who wants to speak up, speak up.
Linda, what, are you muted, Linda? You're,
I don't see Linda.
yeah,
No, I don't see her.
I see her.
she's there.
Oh, does she? Oh, yeah, there she is. Yes, you're right.
It's like there's something wrong with her.
Yeah, test your microphone. Test your microphone, Linda,
I don't think it's connected.
because you're not muted
No, she's not.
to the icon.
We're anxious to hear your words of wisdom, Linda. And actually, while we're waiting for Linda to get her microphone working, she and her husband Rolf were a big part of my life a long time ago. They visited here every Christmas for a long time, and I just remember those times so much. The best part was that night, shortly after their wedding, they were out observing, and Rolf was going, "My Linda," and Linda would go, "My Rolfie, my Rolfie," and then it kept on going, "My Linda," and went on like this. And the rest of the group were saying, "When is that going to stop?" And the thing is, it never did. But then it went on and said, "My Linda." And Linda said, "Yes, I've just discovered a comet." That was his fourth comet discovery. And I've never forgotten that story.
By the way, Chris, you're allowed to unmute if you want to speak. Oh. Okay.
Thank you for letting me unmute. Before I forget, David, Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I just wanted to say, I can't believe it, because I think I was only about 15 or 16 when I met you. You know, when a bunch of us in the Ottawa Centre went down to Montreal, and we're kind of amazed by this presentation by Isabel with a mini planetarium projecting up to the ceiling. You might remember that evening. We had, yes. Well, anyway, it was very good, because some of you at the Montreal Centre came back to see us too. So I'm no longer a lifer, because that doesn't exist in the RASC anymore. But
I thought it did. I'm on.
well, I got rid of it a few years ago, apparently. So
Yeah.
technically, it
I'm
doesn't
a
really
lifer.
exist.
You can't buy a new
So am
life.
I. Yeah.
You can't buy a new life membership. But those of
Okay,
us
that's what it is.
who are life members, so long as we are still alive, we are still
Alive.
life members. Yes. The number of life memberships cannot go up. It can only go down.
Well, one interesting thing about your visit is that in 1973, we returned the favor, and we went up to Ottawa, where Kathy Hall, who is in the audience tonight, gave a lecture about how much fun it would be to look for comets. And I had already started my search for comets then, so I just loved that. But someone else was in the audience that night who listened very closely to what Kathy was saying, and that was Rolf Meyer. And I believe he told me that it was that lecture that inspired him to start his search for comets, that resulted in 4 discoveries from Canada. We're very proud of that, and we miss Rolfie very much.
One thing I'd like to say that's been an amazing part of my life's journey was being able to be in a very fortunate place to be in Montreal at the time. I was only 15 or 16, and one point there was some heavy political stuff going on, and David said to me at one point, you can give up the center, but don't give up on astronomy. Stay with the stars.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
did. I came back, and I'm still here with
Yeah,
much.
Alistair, it's so good to see you again.
That was wonderful advice.
Thank you. And I still maintain that. I gotta admit that I have mixed feelings about parting with all the telescopes. I got the idea at our retreat this summer, and I knew it was the right idea. But now that they're all gone, I kind of miss them. But I'm going to keep these 3 and keep them till I die. And I did have to get one girl's approval of that before I did that, and that was my daughter. And she actually gave her blessing to it.
Well,
She
tell us.
just said that what I wanted to do is that anyone who inherited one of the telescopes was supposed to give a donation to a charity of their choice. And my daughter said, make sure it's not a trivial donation. And I don't think I've done that. I think that's just what they wanted to do.
Tell us the truth, though. Did you keep a lot of eyepieces, or are those gone too?
I got most of the eyepieces. There's still a lot of eyepieces laying around.
Because that could be an addiction as well.
Oh yeah, I got a lot of eyepieces. This telescope has its own type of eyepieces, but the other 2, I can still use them.
Yeah, the Questar is a special format, I believe.
Yeah,
Oh,
I heard the Questar isn't selling them anymore.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
They're closing down.
Yeah,
what?
that's what.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I still can't believe Meade and Coronado are gone. Anna Ryan,
Hmm.
a lot of changes.
Yeah.
I mean, whoever heard of SV Bonnie 2-3 years ago? Now it's all over the place, like new brands, I guess.
Kind of like TVs.
Yeah, it's weird, you know? I guess times change, you know?
Dean Koenig from Star Arizona actually took out a dealership of Questar just so he could get this one telescope. And then he sold it to Wendy at his cost.
Wow.
And he only had the dealership for this one telescope.
That's the 3.5 inch.
It's a 3.5 inch. This
Mhm.
is cute.
Said it was 2.5.
No, it's a 3.5.
Oh, it's a 3.5. Okay.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot the C90, the Maksudov that I started with. I have a lot of fond memories of that compact little telescope. It's what started me in astronomy 33 years ago.
Yeah. Do you still
But-
have that C90?
Yeah, believe it or not, I do. But the one thing, and this is Bill Stropel's fault, when he was working when he was working at Harrison's, of course I had the little 965 format eyepieces, and you know, there was like looking through a straw. And of course I was getting more anxious to bigger and better, of course. And then I was flipping through magazines as, you know, Sky and Telescope and Astronomy. And there's a big ad from Teleview, caress your vision. And there's like a Nagler 13. And I didn't realize that eyepieces could be the size of Coke cans and not these tiny little things. So I go to Harrison's, and one guy behind the counter, it was Bill Stropel with his ponytail at the time. And he introduced me to all these different formats and what you can expand. So of course I graduated to the Celestial Ultimas, and they're actually collectible today. If you go on Cloudy Nights, the old ones made in Japan, they're quite, like, they get sold the minute they get posted. So I got an 18mm.
Wow.
What a big difference with the bushing adapter for the 965 format to 1 1/4. And ever since then, it's a sickness. So you go to this every year, and then you see Al Megler with his collection and the blems on sale, and you got to top off on certain focal lengths, and yet now everything's going imaging photography.
Not me. I'm still
Yeah,
a visual.
I know. There's nothing like looking at Saturn for yourself. I always tell people that it's your own private photons that hit your retina. No one else has those photons. And when you stop and think about that, you can go on Facebook.
Do you still have your C90?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And
Yeah, because I used my C90 for the 1979 eclipse.
Yeah.
And for all my eclipses until I got this telescope.
That's a quality. I mean, that's a much better quality, obviously. I'll tell you a quick story, and I'll let it go after that. When I bought my C90 in Florida, in Miami, at the photo store, and I was all excited. And when I came home back to Montreal, I was stopped at customs, and they thought it was some kind of gun. Because let's face it, these compact Maksudovs and Schmidt-Cassegrains, they don't look like a telescope, like what you always think is a pirate scope, right? And I had to explain to him that it's a mirror and a meniscus and everything, and it folds the light, and then the thing on top is not a rangefinder for target, but it's a target for sky. And I explained it, and after a half an hour with the officer, I'm not kidding, he goes, "Wow, where can I get one of these things that you can look at the moon and craters?" And I go, "Yeah, I have belts of Jupiter and Saturn's rings and all kinds of crazy things and nebulas." And then, if anything, I got detained more because he was fascinated than a threat. So then I got to pack up and leave. But yeah, we've all had our weird experiences with carrying our, let's face it, unusual equipment on airplanes and things.
That's a beautiful, beautiful story. I have a similar one with Cupid. I was going into England, and it was almost the same thing. They said, "What is that?" And I said, "That's a telescope. Would you like to look through it?" And there weren't too many other people at customs then, and all the other employees ran over. They all wanted to take a look. I just looked down the hallway in the airport and focused it, and they all got this look through Cupid.
It's never, yeah, it never gets old. Let's face it, a lot of what we have as equipment looks bizarre. Never mind my video movie equipment and all kinds of crazy things. When I went through Hawaii back when I was using motion picture film in the early 2000s, I kept telling them the X-rays will fog my film, and they go, "Oh, no, National Geographic comes here all the time," and they go through. I go, "Okay, but Kodak told me don't fog the film, have it manually inspected." And I had a change-out bag because it was 16 and 35mm movie film, which is quite expensive. They would have nothing of it. They passed it through the X-ray machine. It's still developed properly, and I got the footage I needed. But yet again, always bizarre. Let's face it, we're all weird with these things. I wouldn't have it any other way, though. Like, look at the stuff we get to see that so many people are not aware of.
Yeah.
We're all busy looking down like this, and we can be looking up and seeing how amazing things really are.
Well said.
Tonight, and I'm thinking of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada and how much I love the RASC and wanting it to go on and on and on forever. It's just so special. What a special, unique organization. From 1868 and all the way to now, it's a wonderful organization. honored to be a part.
How's your observing chair holding out, David?
Oh, it's great. It's great, Carl. I'm finally getting used to it. I put a big cushion on it so that I can be more comfortable sitting on it, but it's working perfectly. And I use it whenever I go to our very dark side.
That's glad to hear.
I'm glad to hear you're getting some good use out of it.
Yeah, I am. I will be for many years.
I do have some breaking news, though. I went to Chinois 2 Saturdays ago with some friends, and there was no matzo ball soup available.
What?
Wasn't the only one asking. Another party came in. They ordered it. It was supper time. They ran out. I couldn't believe it. For those that are uninitiated, that's essentially like it's a giant ball made out of flour, water, egg, and it absorbs like the chicken broth. And Chinois, one of the last like old school delicatessens in the area, serves. It's literally a meal. It comes in a giant square dish. It's like you just have that with the drink and you're set. So I was quite down about that. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. You can still get them on almost any delicatessen.
Oh yeah. Yeah, but this was Chinois.
I can't wait to get back to Montreal to have some matzo ball soup.
I did have French onion soup that night, though. It was good, but it's not the same.
It's almost the same thing. You can get French onion soup here in Arizona.
What? Really?
Yeah, in fact, yeah, French onion soup is very popular in Arizona, southern Arizona.
Would never have guessed.
Yeah.
But do you get put in?
You want poutine?
You want poutine?
Of course.
Or
Yes.
Rolaids.
No. Good poutine.
You know, you're old. When I went to the drugstore a few weeks ago and I asked for Rolaids, they didn't know what the heck that was. I felt so. I'm not kidding. Never mind Kodak. I mean, yeah, times have changed. I'm gonna sign off. My airlock is has a leak. So David, it was so nice seeing you, and we should do this more often. We should get together more often like this. This is awesome.
I would like that too. I think that's a very important thing. And it would bring different centers and give it a more of a national sense. You know, I mean, I know that Susan from Kingston is here, and I think it would be so nice if we were to include other centers in our weekly Zoom session that we have in Kingston every Wednesday. I just love doing that.
Okay.
Maybe some ask Jenna to start up a national weekly social.
I would love to be involved in that. I would come religiously. I don't know about religiously, but I would attend.
I'm signing off the ISS. Take care.
Good night.
You take care. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
I'm also going to wish you all good night. Thanks, David.
Thank you.
I'm also off. Good night. Thank you, David, Peter, Montreal Center. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's good to glad you appeared here.
Yeah, good night,
Thanks,
everybody.
David.
Good night, everybody. Take care, David.
See. Nowhere.
Night.
Turn it off.
What's that?
Are we calling this a career now?
I'm sorry?
Are we calling this a night?
Yeah, we can. I mean, there's only 11 of us left. But I mean, if you want to speak a little longer, go ahead. It's up to you.
Ah, yes. Well, when I was younger, we could talk forever.
Peter,
Yes,
Peter,
yes, Doveed.
you say you are going to Hawaii this winter.
I haven't decided yet. We're still watching the news every day and trying to get a reading on what life will be like for you folks living in the US in January, February. We'll try and make up our minds in the next week or two.
I hope a wall doesn't go up.
Yeah.
Well, if a wall is going up, it would be us who puts it up. So, because I can tell you right now, Roxham Road will be busy again.
Yeah.
I'd kind of like to see them put a wall around Hawaii. I'd like Trump to put the first stone down too.
Go down.
Can it be tied to his ankle?
On our last visit.
Oh, yeah.
On our last visit to Hawaii, one of the interesting things, Honolulu is not on the big island, as most of you probably know. It's on the island of Oahu, and Oahu is still it's a good sized island. Honolulu, the big city, is on the southeast corner of the island, and around, if you drive around, which you can do this, there's a road going basically all around the island. If you go around the southeast corner of the island and start going up the east side of the island, just a few minutes, Barack Obama has a house there. It's literally right on the water. It's right on the shore. The road goes by his house. And when we were there last 2 years ago, it was still under construction. But the local folks were a little, amused to be able to say that Barack Obama was going to be their neighbor. But at the same time, there's the inconvenience of having that level of security. That road will probably have some kind of a barrier, or at the very least, there'll be surveillance on that road in front of Obama's house, basically forever, as long as Obama and his family are still living there. So yeah, there's things about having a wall around even Hawaii. Yeah.
We had that in Montreal in 1970.
Yep.
Yeah.
1970?
Boy,
71.
talk about not talking about politics. Allison, you had to bring up 1970.
One of the things that your prime minister has been prime minister forever, and a little story. My mom was still living when he became leader of the Liberal Party. And I said, so what do you think of Justin? And Mom looked at me and said, I think he's cute as hell.
Hair.
My mom could say things like that. She got in their last years, she developed a wonderful sense of humor.
Yeah, well, she was always amused with the stories you told, David, that's for sure.
Yeah.
The Army cultivated my sense of humor, and sometimes it makes it hard in mixed company. On that note, gentlemen, I bid you all good night. We'll see you again on this wonderful invention called the intranet.
Good night.
Carl, we'll see you next time Montreal does a thing.
Yes, sir, most definitely.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say good night to all too. I finally figured out how to shut this off because I'm using my mobile phone and not the computer. Anyway, have a lovely weekend, folks. And I hope it's a good Remembrance Day for you all as well. Happy long weekend for those of you who are still working. You too, David. Good to hear from you again.
Good night, Chris.
Good night, all. Good to hear from you too, Peter, and nice to see Kathy and a few hundred other people I know on this tonight. This is just fantastic. Yes, I would like to do it again. Bye for now.
Bye.
Night.
Just want to say good night and thank you so much for your sharing your story. It was very moving, very inspiring.
Love your
I really
background
liked
there,
hearing it.
Michael. That's impressive.
That is a lovely background you have there.
Thank you. I once about 30 years ago I made a pilgrimage to go there, and because I realized how close it was to San Diego. Sorry, the video went off. And I drove up there, and it was the most incredible experience.
Mm.
For some reason, my video went off, but I couldn't believe it. It was actually a very misty day, so I have a picture of it, just with the mist all around it. And then it was a daytime thing, and it was just such an incredible trip. It was like a one-day trip.
So did you take the photo that's behind you?
No, I found that on the internet, but I like the whole structure of it, and just the way the way it looks and the size and the engineering of it. I really like that.
They knew how to build domes back then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was fortunate to enough to make a pilgrimage to Lowell Observatory in Arizona, and that meant an awful lot to me because when I was about 10 years old, I had a teacher, and if you did all your work, you could read one of the books at the back of the room, and she had one of Percival Lowell's books, and I read it cover to cover, and this was 1963, 64, and of course, soon after I'd finished reading the book full of Martians and water flowing down to the poles and massive geoengineering that was obviously going on the planet, Mariner 4 goes by and destroys it all. But if there was anything that was going to take my interest from just a passing interest in the American space program and the sorts of things I was seeing coming back from from space, from probes and that sort of thing, it was going to be this, and I think that book very much sparked a lifelong passion for astronomy for me. So when I got a chance and to do some work for a company in Arizona, I worked like a dog and was able to go up to Lowell Observatory and not realizing that his mausoleum was there. And I stood with bowed head and thanked him so much for what has been an incredible lifetime journey. And dead though he was intimately responsible for sparking that. And so I was insanely grateful for that.
Roger, I will be at Lowell next week, about 5 days from now.
I've been back once since as well, and it was amazing. What I also liked was when I was getting a tour of the observatory, with their big, was it 26-inch refractor, and there on the desk was a copy of the Observer's Handbook, and they said, we don't know what we would do without this book, and they said it's for sale in the gift shop. I said I get my own copy of it every year. So, but thanks very much for that. I was just kind of curious as why is it there and do you use it? But they said that they could not do their jobs without that book beside them. But a really cool place, right, for both Lowell and for Clive Tombaugh. Anyway, so thank you very much for this evening, Doveed. It was thoroughly enjoyable, and I appreciate your remembrances and inspiration as well.
Thank you.
Very much appreciated.
Thanks for being here, Roger.
Good night.
Thank you again, and good night to everybody.
Good night.
Good night.